Hello everyone, and welcome to session 2 of the Easy Composites training webinar. In this session, we're going to be discussing batch processing, and that is actually pretty easy to do with Easy Composites as long as you understand how the data sheets need filled out. Then it's pretty simple to batch process. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to run a batch process for 3 class composites, and then we'll talk about what it did. You can follow along with the training files that I put in the link to the chat in the webinar. So if you've downloaded those and unzip that folder, then you can use those files to follow along with me. And I'll try to go slow enough so that you can keep up. So we'll just need to select the items for the batch process. And so first I'll select the student images. So under that AI sample images folder, we'll select the one that's called combined. Then we'll need to select the template folder. So the sample class composite template folder is where it's at. And make sure you're selecting the folder underneath that called template files. And then you'll need to make sure you click this batch mode on here. And once that's on, you'll see another button for the save folder. So you'll need to make a folder somewhere. I've got one on my desktop. You can put it wherever you want, but then just select that folder. And we will load in the data file. In the download, it comes with a data file that's already set up. I'm not going to discuss this until after we're done running this quick batch, but that's the file we will select here. Then it's under the CSV data files folder in that download. Go ahead and select that. And we might as well customize this with what we learned from yesterday's lesson. So I'll go ahead and select a background image from that download folder here. And we'll use that same blue gradient background that we used in yesterday's lesson. And then I've already selected some here, but I'll show you what I'm going to select. So if you want to follow along with the exact settings, I'm just going to use beveled corners and then custom 3 for the styles for all 3 of them, which is the yellow color. That should be all we need. So I'm just going to hit build composites here. And you can see it's brought in that blue gradient and it's building the composites now. This will take about a minute for this computer. Your computer may be a little faster or a little slower depending on the speed of your computer. All right, that took just over a minute here. I'm going to go ahead and open the files. Your computer may not be done yet, but that's okay. We'll talk about this for a minute here and let your computer catch up if you're not. So you see that it's built all 3 of these composites here. And you can see it's brought in all of the text. And it's also brought in the logo here. And it's brought in those custom styles for the yellow color, the yellow border, and the bevel that we selected. So really, if your data file is set up, you can just run. And we just did 3 here, but you could do 50. It really doesn't matter. You can do as many as you want as long as your data file is set up properly. I'll point out one more thing too that it did. That's kind of subtle, but if you look at the graphics, you can see that this it realigned the graphics to match the template opening. We discussed that in yesterday's webinar, so I won't get into that too much. And if we had used that template where we had even 2 rows, and would have brought that down more to match the spacing as well. But pretty much everything is done. So let's get in and talk about what it actually did here. So in the data file, this is the sample file that had the data that was needed for this run, but it's going to vary depending on what you are doing. You might need fewer columns or more columns. So you only need to set up the columns that you need for your specific batch. The only thing it actually needs to run is the first column. And that first column in cell A1 has to read easy comp with all capital letters. And this is the column that contains the image file names. If it only has this one column, it's going to take all the images in that column and build a composite with all of those images on a single composite. So what that could be useful for is, let's say you have a folder of 1,000 images and you might want to build one composite with, 40 or 50 images. You could create a 1-column CSV with just those images, and it would build a composite with just those images. Now, I'll point out one more thing too. If you remember from yesterday that we had the files named by last_first, and we did that so that way we could pull in the student name based on the file name. If you're using a CSV, you don't need that. It could be just the image name straight off your camera, like img_0001.jpg. It doesn't need the name here, and it's not even going to use the name in your file name if you're using a data file. It's going to get the name from the first name and last name column. Now, I mentioned that you only need 1 column to run, but if you only had 1 column, it's not going to import your text. It's actually going to hide those text layers. So normally you'll have in a data file at least these 3 columns. So the first and last name is what it uses to import the name that you see here. And then it's going to sort the data by last name and then by first name for the order in which it puts these students into the template. So you can see here that, let's find one that's got an A for a name. So we got Anderson, Black, Bryant, Carter. So you've seen us put the last names in alphabetical order. Then if there was 2 students with the same last name, it would then go by first name for the order. With the exception, it put the teacher here to the first slot. How it was able to accomplish that is with the force order column. Now, if you remember from yesterday, we talked about if you're not using a data sheet, then it will sort by the file name, and you can put that number in front of their name. It's not going to use that if you are running with a data file. So if you have a number in front of their name, or in front of the file name, that's not going to do anything for the sorting unless you're using this option, the data mode file names option. That's the only time that it will use this number in front of the file name. If you're using a data file, in order to force the order, you have to use this force order column. Normally, you're just going to want to force something to the front. So you put a number 1 for whatever image you want to force to the first slot. And it doesn't have to be the first one in the order of the data sheet. It could be anywhere in the data sheet. So if you put a 1 right here, and this is your class, then this image gets forced to the first slot. Everything else it then sorts by last name and then first name. You could put multiple. You could put a 1 and then a 2 and force 1 to the first slot and then the second slot. I will point out, though, that you cannot skip slots. So you can't just force 1 into slot 5, for example, unless there's something in 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the reason why is because it's just performing a sorting function. It's not actually looking at that number and correlating it to an actual slot. So it's going to sort the data by the force order column, then the last name column, and then the first name column. The other thing you can do is if you want to force something to the back, you could put 10,001 and like 10,002, for example, and it would sort this one to the back and this one next to the end, the next one over. It's got to be numbers greater than 10,000. And the technical reason is because when it imports the data, if there's nothing in there, it imports it as 10,000. And so since it would import all the blanks as 10,000, those essentially then don't get sorted and it goes to last and then first. I'm not going to get into all the technical stuff really on this, but just know that put 1 if you want the teacher to go to the front or a student to go in a featured slot. You could put 1 and they would go to the front. Okay, so moving on, these next columns here, these are group text columns. And these are the columns that are being used here to replace the text for the group headers. So this text, for instance, where it says Challenger Elementary School, and then Miss Walker second grade and 2425. Now, it's going to use that text exactly as it is written in your sheet or typed in your sheet. So for example, if you wanted one text item to be a combination of a teacher name and then a grade, like Mrs. Jang hyphen kindergarten as example, or Mrs. Walker hyphen second grade, that has to go into a cell combined exactly like you want it to go in the template. So if you're getting the data from your school and you may have grade here and you may have a teacher in a column, if you want those together in a text item, you're going to have to do your spreadsheet magic to concatenate the cells or however you do it to combine those to get those into a column like that. And I specifically did it for the webinar this way so I could just mention that. That's why I specifically set it up this way. So these headers, there are more available headers you can use than just what you see here in this particular spreadsheet, which we'll get into in a minute. But whatever the headers are, those are the text layers that it's looking for. So for example, school name. Let me open the actual template file. So it's going to get those headers from the graphics file. Notice when I saved that file, I actually left this red line on. That'll get hidden when it runs. But anyway, just to point out, if you see the file when you open it and it's got that showing there, that wasn't supposed to be. But nonetheless, it's going to look for example, school name. It's going to look for a layer called school name. And in this template, there's a school name -rm. Now, if you're familiar with the sports photo automation plugin, you'll know that there is auto resizing, and it works the exact same way in Easy Composites. If you have -r or -rm at the end of the text item name, that's going to designate automatic resizing. So -rm is resize maximum. That means if the text is longer or wider than the width of the text in the template, it's going to scale it down. If it's shorter, it's not going to mess with it. If it was -r, then that's resize mode, and it always resizes. So if it's too short, it stretches it. If it's too long, it condenses it. So RM is a very typical mode you'll use, and if it's got nothing here, oops, if it just has the text name, then it's not going to do any resizing. All right, now in the data sheet, you don't put that -rm, so you don't want to do this because it's not going to use it in the data sheet if it's this way. And the reason why is because you might have different templates that use different resizing modes. So it wouldn't make sense to set it up in the template to enter that. So the way it's set up here, this will work with any template, regardless of whether it's using a resize mode or not, it will work with it. So just leave that -r or -rm off in the data sheet. So it's the same. You got this group text 1, and it's going to look for this group text 1 layer. And then you got your teacher layer and your year layer, and that's where it's getting these other 2 text items to replace the text. All right, and the last 2 things, this YB group text actually is not being used, and the YB group ID is not being used for that batch process we just did. Those are yearbook items, which I'll get into in the next video. So this one data sheet we've got will work with class composites or yearbooks. It is using the group ID. Whenever you batch process, it's going to group the images by whatever is in this group ID column. So anything with the exact same text get grouped together. It doesn't have to say a teacher's name. You could put in anything in here. You could put in a number. It could be, let's say you just wanted the number. You could put 1 all the way down, and it would group all of these into the same composite. Now it's usually easiest to use teacher name, but for the case where you might have 2 teachers with the same name, you would have to put like something on the end of the name to be able to differentiate between the 2 teachers. So you could have a _1 and then _2. So, but normally you can just use the teacher's name for the group ID column. And the last thing is this column called logo file. Now this is completely optional whether you want to use a logo, but if you do want to automatically import a logo into your template, then the template first has to be set up for a logo. And this one is, there's this logo setup layer. I've got a video. I'm not going to do all that in this training webinar, but I've got a video on that. It's basically you click a button and it adds this logo area, and you scale and move that where you want, and then it will import your logo into that smart object, and you save it in your graphics file in your template. Now the logos, if you're doing this, they've got to be in a subfolder underneath your, I'll just show you here. So in the folder that contains all of your images, you need a folder, it's all lowercase, just called logos. And then in that folder, you put your logos that you're going to use, and that's the folder it's going to look at for which logo to import. And whatever is in your spreadsheet, So in this example, I used three different. I used bulldog.weppy, seahawk.weppy, and tiger.weppy. So generally your logos are going to have transparent backgrounds. So you'll use a ping, a TIFF, or a weppy, or it's WebP, but pronounced weppy. But in any case, you'll use one of those three formats for images with transparency. And usually for a whole school, you're just going to use the same logo. I just did three for this demo just to do it. All right, I think that about, oh no, it doesn't cover everything. There's one more thing I wanted to talk about. Now we just did a demonstration with a batch process. However, if we wanted to use that same data sheet and run one image at a time, it works exactly the same way. So you import that data sheet the same way and just don't select your batch mode. Then when you go to build your composite, it's going to give you the group ID options from your spreadsheet. So we could just run one of them. So we can also say combine all groups. So bring everything in as one big group, but we could just select the one we want. And then it's going to build us just that class. And it's not going to save it. It's going to leave it open for us to edit. So really handy if you just need to build one or two and you have a data sheet ready. And again, it's imported the logo and the text and the names and everything exactly the same as it would if it was batching, other than it's one at a time. Anyway, we're going to go to question and answers now. And then I'll answer anything and go into Photoshop Live and try to explain anything more if you have questions. And then after that, we'll come in and do the yearbook, which is going to be a lot simpler than this demonstration because the yearbook is almost identical to batch processing with just a couple of changes.